Appreciate that scripture reading. This is Deuteronomy's version of the Ten Commandments. Usually, if you were to look at the Ten Commandments, we typically tend to go to Exodus's version. And they're really pretty much the same thing. But have you ever compared the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy and the Ten Commandments in Exodus? Of course you haven't, because you're not a nerd. Okay, but I've done that. I've actually lined them up. And it is the same 10 commandments, but sometimes there's kind of this follow-up commentary on them that is maybe a little bit different in wording. But this one that Eric just read, the fourth commandment about the Sabbath, its commentary is the most different from that in Exodus. Just a few changes in words. It says observe the Sabbath in Deuteronomy. Exodus says remember the Sabbath. The command, it's similar, but the reasoning behind it is different. Exodus says work 6 days, but rest the seventh. And that includes, this is something we forget. It's not just you, but your kids, your animals, your servants, even the foreigners living in the land should rest. That one's interesting. They should follow these rules even though they're not part of your community. Then it's basically saying, do all this because God created. God worked and then rested on the seventh day. And that day he rested. That kind of made it holy. So you need to rest because God rested. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's Exodus's take. God set aside and gave us a day of rest because he himself needs rest. God needs rest. If you think, I'll sleep when I'm dead. If you think rest is for the weak, remember, God needs rest. And if you look at the Gospels, even Jesus took naps. So you need it. It is not weakness to need rest. It's being human. It is not weakness to need rest, but it is arrogance to think that you don't. God needs rest. So basically, Exodus's take on it says rest and remember the Sabbath because, hey, even God needs rest. But Deuteronomy's take is a little different. It lists a little bit more specifically who should rest. Not just animals, but it lists the work animals, an ox and a donkey. And so it kind of leads you to what is the purpose of this command? What is the purpose of this rest? Really what it's saying is, hey, when you rest, everybody rests. No cheating. No cheating. You can't take a day off, but make your servants work. You can't take a day off, but let your animals go work. When you rest, everyone rests. In fact, if you look at the wording, it says you rest so that your male and female slaves may rest as well as you. It's kind of giving a different reason for the command than Exodus does. Hey, the reason God here is giving this law, this command, is so that other people can rest. You rest so that you rest for those that are working for, so that those working for you, those under you can rest. And so here, this is a move in the Ten Commandments. This law of resting on the Sabbath, it's a move to protect everybody, including the slave, including the foreigner. It's almost as if a big part of the reason for the Sabbath is to give those under you a break, to make sure your workers and your neighbors and your animals aren't overworked, to make sure they aren't abused. And if you don't believe that that's the point of this rule in Deuteronomy, then look at the commentary after it. In Exodus, the kind of reason behind it is because God rested. But in Deuteronomy, the reasoning behind the Sabbath is because, remember, you were a slave once too. Have some empathy. Remember when you were a slave? You could have gone for a day off, couldn't you? That would have been really nice, but you didn't get it. But here it's saying, remember, you were a slave too. You have some empathy and treat them better. Treat them how you would have wanted to be treated. And in actuality, it almost exposes them anyway. It's almost like, should you have really even had this anyway? Did you like it? Maybe you shouldn't even have these. But if you are, and I say have, it's not like chattel slavery like American slavery was. It's a little different. More servant may have been a better word. But what it's getting at is, hey, you got to take care of these people. The reason behind this, giving you rest is so that other people get rest as well. That's Deuteronomy's take. It's a little different than Exodus's. And in fact, a lot of times we break up the 10 Commandments into love God and love others. And in Exodus, the fourth command of remember the Sabbath, it's to love God. But if you take Deuteronomy's take, you remember the Sabbath to love others. I rest so you can rest. And so it's kind of a hinge point. Remembering the Sabbath is about both. It's about loving God and loving others. And another point I see the text making is that it is really hard to rest when no one else does. If you're not resting, I can't rest. And so it's a reminder that, look, if you're working, your servants are working. If you're working, your animals are working. If you're working, your hired hands are working. If you don't rest, no one else gets rest. And this is really true in our American competitive capitalistic society. If you want to beat the competition, you better work overtime. You need to put in more time. You need to put in more hours. You have to stay open later. You got to work weekends. You got to outthink them. You got to outwork them. You got to outsell them. And so if the competition rests, good. We can work and we win. But on the other side of that, if the competition doesn't rest, then we got to keep going. We got to keep going with them. We can't rest either, or we'll get beat. That's why Black Friday sales start Thursday night now. Thanksgiving night. Got to beat the competition. Got to start early. You know, Americans are one of the most overworked countries in the world. Pretty much no one in Europe works as much as we do. And let's not even mention, well, we're going to mention it, how we can take work home with us. On our phones, on our laptops, our emails. We're always connected to work now. We're very overworked. You know, one of the most common deathbed regrets is I wish I didn't work so much. But we've kind of been set up, and this isn't, I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying it is. But we've been set up in a society that really encourages us to just overwork and be busy all the time. And we feel like we can't rest because other people aren't resting. And it's not just with work. I mean, there's FOMO about, you know, social stuff. Oh, they're all going out and doing stuff. I guess I got to go out and do all that stuff too. This is why set holidays are so important. And you can see, like I mentioned, we're cutting into the set holidays now. We're so busy. Black Friday starts on Thanksgiving. We're cutting into all this stuff. But set holidays are nice where we all agree. It's almost like a ceasefire. I'll stop if you stop. I'll stop competing if you stop competing, and let's all rest together. You ever been to a country where they have a siesta? It's becoming more rare, but I know there's been times in Mexico where it's like 2 o'clock, and I'm like, I'm ready to go shopping, and nothing's open. They've agreed to a ceasefire. We're all going to stop together and rest this afternoon. That's cool. I wish we could bring back the siesta. I don't think it's going to happen. But it's not just, our society's not just restless and busy because of work schedule. It's other things too, right? We have kids in so many extracurriculars that we're just running from one place to another. We try to be movers and shakers in the community and always being a part of something. You know, families rarely eat around the table together anymore. We're too busy. In fact, we're so busy and we're so in a rush now that the average American family spends more money at restaurants than grocery stores. Isn't that crazy? Or is it not? None of you look shocked at all. And we don't have time. We don't have time to sit back and cook. We're going to the restaurants. And it's interesting because technology is always marketed as it's something that's going to give us more time. If you get this, you're going to have more time to do what you want to do. But it's actually end up consuming a lot more of our time. One, because we got to work more to be able to pay for this stuff. But again, there's more to it than that. Your phone, you know, you think about this. Is like I said last week, you can look and see how much you were on it this past week. If you have an iPhone, it's going to give you that update. Some of our busyness comes from not realizing what a time suck that our phone is. It really takes up a lot of our time. And so, as we talk about resting, maybe some of you are thinking, well, like, yeah, I rest with my phone. I sit on my bed and I look at my phone. That's not good rest. That's not the kind of rest we're talking about. It's a pretty unhealthy rest. One is, look, everything that you're on your phone, websites, social media, apps, they're all designed to keep you on. They're all designed to keep you on longer. The longer they keep you on, the more clicks they get, the better. And so you may think, oh, I'm just going to rest for 5 or 10 minutes. And next thing you know, you've been there an hour. They're designed to keep you on and waste your time. They're time wasting. It's a time wasting device. But it's actually at the same time, another reason I say that it's not good rest is because you're consuming. Rest means to not consume, but you're sitting there consuming. And even really, depending on what you're looking at, your mind's being programmed. So this is not, your phone does not offer the kind of rest. It's not the kind of rest that God wants you to have. It's not the kind of rest that God offers. So as we think about rest, as we think about reform, if you've been using your phone to rest, maybe that's something that you could stop. Don't use your phone to rest. But we all probably agree that we are busy and need rest, right? But just in case, I want to share with you just a few spiritual benefits of rest, where when we are in the quiet, when we're not consuming, here's a few benefits. One is rest reminds us who we are. We're human beings, not human doings. When we rest, we're actually acknowledging and honoring our human limitations. I need this. It's a small act of humility to rest. Because the other side of it, the busyness, a lot of time it's our pride and our status seeking that keep us busy. So to rest is to say, I'm going to move off of that hamster wheel. I'm not worried about building up my kingdom. I'm going to rest. And it's also kind of a time to stop and say, wait a minute. Am I taking my identity from my busyness, from what I produce? Am I taking my identity from status that I get from what I produce? Because that's kind of what our busyness is about. We're seeking identity in it. And so resting in God reminds us that our value comes from somewhere else other than what we produce, other than how successful we are. So it reminds us of who we are. Then rest makes us rely on God. As we learn to better rest, we kind of find sometimes we have this anxious rest. You ever tried to stop and rest or been laying in bed and you start thinking about the to-dos and you can't really rest, or maybe you even quit resting because you have this anxiety and you got to go get back to work? That's hard to do. But rest really helps us when we learn to rest in God. We kind of learn that the to-dos aren't as important as we think. So it helps us to rely on God. Another one is rest helps us to receive. I think of this, the invitation God said, hey, be still and know I am God. I'm in control. I'm present. I'm here. But I found that in rest, in moments where I'm not consuming, meaning I'm not consuming music, I'm not watching TV, I'm not watching a show, I'm not on my phone. When my mind's not consuming, when it's allowed to rest and wonder, I'm the most creative. It's in those moments of rest where I have kind of the coolest thoughts, and some of that feels almost received. You ever felt like that? It feels almost received. I feel I best hear the voice of God when all other voices have been silenced. I think most of you would agree with that, right? I think some of my classes and messages that I'm most excited about, some happen when I'm studying the Bible. Others happen when I've studied the Bible earlier that day. And now my mind's resting and I'm kind of ruminating on some of those things. When I'm on the back porch staring, or when I'm sitting kind of laying in bed at night and my mind's clear, that's a lot of times when those really cool things come. So yesterday I went and celebrated my grandma's 90th birthday. And me and my wife stayed and hung out a long time after, had a real nice time, then realized, oh man, it's late, we got to go. And my grandparents did the thing that, I think this is a sweet, stereotypical grandparent thing, is we're trying to leave. They're like, well, you want me to cook you some dinner real quick? Let me make you a meal. Or, we can make up a bed upstairs, you can stay here. And that's my grandma voice. And I said, a preacher joke, I said, hey, look, I gotta get back tonight. I gotta figure out what I'm preaching on tomorrow. And my grandpa, I don't really do that, I'm way in advance. But my grandpa says, well, Brady, you got 2 hours to figure out your sermon in the car on the way home. And he said, My grandpa was a builder. He built houses. And he said, I built all my houses on the road. When I'm sitting there in the car, mindlessly not listening to music, and he's thinking through in his head how to build houses. And I was thinking that's true, that a lot of our creativity, we're losing that time to process and to be idle. And so I thought that was actually a really cool point, is a lot of our stuff comes from when we are decompressing, when we're not taking anything in, and we can kind of put our problems into perspective. We don't have time for that as often anymore. Another one is rest. Rest blesses others. Because like I mentioned, our rest gives others rest. And I found with my kids, when I throw out the to-do list and when I put away my phone, I'm more enjoyable, I'm less stressed, and I'm more present with them. And so in that way, my rest is blessing my children. And so there's a few, and you could come up with a whole lot more, right? And so here's what I want to do. Is as we think about reforming the way we rest, I'm going to throw out some ideas that you have how to reform it. Some of this may be applicable to you, some maybe not. So you just decide. But one is find healthy ways to decompress. And not, like I said, not with phones. I had a friend, I remember one time telling me about how much he loves going to the shooting range and how when he's at the shooting range, his head gets cleared. You know, he feels at peace. He feels like everything else is blocked out and he just can unwind. And I remember thinking, the way he was talking about that, I was thinking like, man, that's cool. And I don't have anything like that. I don't have anything that helps me unwind in that way. And this was years ago. And so I do want you to think about, do you have that or do you need to find that? My closest one to that, and this is really lame, is a power nap. If I can just get a 15-minute nap, if I can just go in my room and have that quiet for just a few minutes and get that short nap in, that really helps me a lot. That's the way I can decompress and unwind. And some of you are thinking, oh, that's weak. Jesus took naps. Power naps are good. And there's a lot of studies actually saying that like, hey, a power nap's good. And so you're seeing some businesses and some schools are actually installing napping stations in, which is kind of weird. But and so think, what is that for you? How do you decompress? Is it a walk, a bike ride, maybe just sitting in the car for an extra few minutes before you get in or out? So find that healthy way to decompress a little bit. Another one is enjoy the freedom in saying no. There's so much freedom in the word no, and it's so hard for us to say, right? It takes sacrifice. It requires getting off this hamster wheel of kind of feeling like we got to please everybody. It's hard for us to say no because we don't want to feel like we're letting somebody down. It takes strength to say no. But it will reduce stress. It will reduce anxiety. Gives us more time for what matters, more time for rest. And so I really do want to tell you, I believe the benefits of saying no will be better than whatever you lose. Will be better than whatever the cost of the letdown is. Learn to say no. Another one, reduce stuff. Again, because if you buy less stuff, you buy less stuff. You don't need the gadgets. You don't need all the things that you think you need. But when you do that, you'll have more money, and so you won't be stressed about having to get more money. But the other thing is, if you have less stuff, less upkeep, less things to have to clean, less things to have to worry about. So if you get less stuff, if you introduce that simplicity into your life, you'll worry less, and there's going to be more space. I think there will be a breath of fresh air if you reduce stuff, and you'll realize how much of this is consuming your work life and in your thought life. Another one, take a mental health day. I've heard so many of you talk about how many like sick days and off days you have built up. They kind of build up throughout the year, right? Or throughout the years. And you're kind of saving those up, right? Maybe some of you can actually cash them in and get paid for those days. Or maybe you're kind of thinking, one day, I'm going to have a really big vacation with all these things I've saved up. Or I'm saving up kind of for a rainy day. If there's an emergency or something, I want to have these sick days just in case. Because, if you're going to use them, it's got to be for good reason. I dare you to use one of them for no reason. I dare you to take off a day just because. I won't tell your boss. It can be our secret. And not to take it off to work around the house, not to take it off to catch up on some neglected to-do list, just to chill, to sleep in, to go to lunch with your spouse or a friend, just relax. I know that almost sounds like the devil on your shoulder, right? To tell you, yeah, take it. No, go take it. Take that off day. One of the things we gave our kids for Christmas, and it's not just because we're trying to save money, is we gave our kids a skip day of school. You get to choose one day to skip school and just kind of have a mental health day. And it did save money, though. Work that in. Take a mental health day at some point. It's something everything in our society, everything in our mindset says, do not do that. Do it. And another one, I kind of mentioned this earlier, I put zone out time. And I put zone out time sounds so counterintuitive. Why would I want to waste that time? It's not a waste. It's not a waste. That's where you retool, where you recharge. I almost put quiet time there. But quiet time makes us think we need to get out our Bible and we need to study. And I don't mean study time. I mean zone out time. Because that's really, and it might turn into prayer. It might turn into something different. But schedule that time to just kind of let your brain recharge. And that's hard to do. And so maybe, kind of like my grandpa said, maybe it's when you're driving, don't listen to music. Just drive in silence and zone out then. But find a way to schedule that in, and it's going to be hard at first. But just give maybe start with 5 minutes. I'm just going to sit here and zone out, let my mind reprogram, recharge. I think you'll find that it sounds very counterintuitive. It sounds not beneficial. It sounds not productive. But there's going to be some good things coming from just having a few moments where you're not consuming. So as I mentioned earlier, our world views busyness as we are important, as we have status because we are busy. But what's weird is for most of human history and in the ancient world, the opposite was true. The important people, the status people, the powerful people, the rich people, the people that everybody looked up to, they were the ones who weren't working. They were the ones living leisure. They were the ones off the hamster wheel. They were the ones who just chilled and relaxed. It was the low class. It was the slaves. It was the plebes that did all the work. It's weird how that switched. But because of that, there's this common theme in creation stories that we see, creation myths, is you see that humans are created for the gods. So the gods would, like the high class of the time, have more leisure time. Humans work so the gods could chill. And so that's what's really interesting about the creation story we have. That's what's really interesting about how radical the Sabbath is. It shows us an incarnational God who works for us. That's different. So we don't always have to. He's not just being served. He works also. God is like, I don't want to say God is like us. Maybe we are, well, maybe that's fair. We're made in his image. There's some similarities. God, like us, works. God, like us, rests. And he gives rest. And that is different from what the other gods offer. If you're here this morning and you want to enter into his rest, if you want to give your life to Christ, or if you have any need at all, we want to invite you to come now as together we stand and sing.